let's introduce Marcin, who has organized this event. Marcin's a professor and head of philosophy of mental health unit, Department of Social Sciences and the Humanities, Poznan University of Medical Science in Poland. Also, he's associate professor at the Institute of Philosophy at Marie Curie Sklodowska University in Lublin, and team leader at IDS NCBR in Warsaw, and many other things. Marcin.
So I'm going to speak about borderline experience, but I will use the examples also to have some methodological remarks on the way about the possibilities of quantifying experience phenomenologically. That's crucial, and also using computational methods for phenomenology. And I just want to say that this is a collective presentation, so I'm just an actor here standing on the shoulder of giants, which are there who did all the empirical work. So my PhD students, Anastazja and Anastazja, who will be there also for the Q&A, and my MA student, Marta, we work together on this project using different methodologies, but for the purpose, the unified purpose of better understanding of, in this case, borderline experience. So I'm just going to start with some basics about phenomenology. This is Ernst Mach, if you know how he looked like on the outside on a black and white photo, third-person perspective on Ernst Mach. And this is his self-portrait, which many people think that this is what phenomenology is about the how of the first-person experience. But phenomenology, as many of you know, it's much more than that. It's about the invariance of the experience. It's not about the Ernst Mach or Marcin Moskalewicz perspective on the world that can be drawn or reported. It's about what is there that we all share. And an example is that it's all within a certain here. Or in transcendental phenomenology, you might say, is that every sound has a pitch, timbre, and intensity, which are essential a priori characterizations of hearing a sound. Well, that might be controversial, but let's not go there too much. Now, what is you can also go down from the transcendental level and think of certain types of experiences. So borderline experience would be a certain type shared among people that would also have supposedly such a core. And the structure of the experience, the phenomenological theory posits, has to do with temporality. So the core of the atypicality of borderline personality is temporal. There are certain aspects to it. I just mentioned them briefly. One is inflexibility, which is, as we argued with Philip Schmidt, who is also here, and Thomas Fuchs in a forthcoming chapter in a book that's coming out with CUP, Conceptualizing Personality Disorder. This inflexibility is what crosses different subtypes, categorically understood personality disorders. When it comes to borderline and temporality, the key concepts that are used in the literature are the concept of immediacy and instantaneity. And another is of the discontinuous passage or fragmented self-narrative. So far, the theory. Oh, sorry, I'm not sure if you've seen it because I have a different screen here, but okay, I just pushed the buttons. Now, how to grasp this temporal core? It's surely not possible to grasp it by measuring the perception of time. So quantifying time. Here's an example from depression because it's more radical, but it illustrates this point I want to make, I think, clear. If there are experiences of the kind, it seems to me that there is no such a thing as a yesterday or as a tomorrow. There is nothing to measure in terms of quantifying or quantifiable clock. Quantifying also seems at odds with phenomenology. What is being accepted these days is that qualitative empirical phenomenology is possible. And as you know, there are very many different methods, clinical and non-clinical, that are being used for phenomenological interviews. The methodological problem is, of course, that there are a lot of issues within the field, which of these methods is a proper one. So phenomenologists often spend a lot of time arguing about the phenomenologicality of a proper method. But what is generally accepted is you have to begin with some lived qualities. And not just lived qualities, as I said, it's not just about the how of experience, but about the invariance of this how. Now, here is a meta-synthesis that we did with Anastazja and Thomas Fuchs of all the research published on all qualitative studies and all phenomenological theoretical studies on the structure of BPD temporality. And you can see that, I won't go into the details, it's divided between the dimensions of lived past, lived present, future, vertically, and horizontally, there are certain concepts that concern more what is explicit in the experience and certain what is more tacit and hidden. And you can see that this picture is quite varied. It goes much beyond this core issue, supposedly core, of instantaneity and immediacy. Now, how to step from this overview of qualities based on empirical studies to quantitative phenomenology? I would argue that the key to that are what I call phenomenological constructs. So these are not phenomena themselves, but constructs based on phenomena in which certain insights are preserved. But these constructs are prone to certain scientific methods to be elaborated on for the sake of, phenomenological research in the end. So it's much easier to define this construct negatively than positively. So I will start with the more negative and then move to the more positive. So what can be said surely is these are non-psychological constructs where the latter are defined in terms of reliability between each other, like with different psychological tests. And these are also not projection tests, which we also use, and I will show you in a second. These projection tests are closer to lived experience, but these are not yet phenomenological. So phenomenological constructs are not that, but they take advantage of the non-phenomenological tools, which I'm going to show how it might work. These are Anna's patients using a drawing Cottle's test, which are projection tests where you draw past, present, and future, and you have a certain scale to interpret it by quantifying the size and the overlap of these imagined, projected, pre-consciously imagined, then consciously and projected notions of how the order of this dimension looks like. The key point is the quantification, and in this table, you have, I'm not sure if you can see the sample size. It's a very big sample for this type of study because it's also qualitative, as you will see in a second. So there were 63 patients with different personality disorders. And one of the tests, two of the tests they did were these objectifying tests. What you can learn from here is that there's certain distinctiveness of borderline personality when it comes to temporality in terms of this objectified constructs lies in increased past negativity. That's one of the constructs on the Zimbardo scale. The past dominance, which is another projected construct on the Cottle scale, and the atomistic arrangement of passages, as you have seen on the picture. Okay, you can also measure certain relationships between these variables. So you can, for example, say, well, at least in this sample, it's of course not a randomized sample because it's almost impossible to do that. But you can see that the personality disorder profile is independent of age and duration of hospitalization, but related to severity of symptoms, which was also clinically checked. So what you have an indirect phenomenology, to use Gallagher's term, or retrospective analysis, when you say that these terms, past negativity, past dominance, atomistic, correspond to the phenomenological theory of instantaneity, discontinuity, and immediacy. But this is done post factum, so it's kind of glued together, whereas the data gathering and interpretation is independent of the theory. So it is not phenomenologically quantified, but it can be used towards that purpose nevertheless. So indirect and not phenomenological. Now, the same sample was, there were interviews with all the patients that were phenomenological in the sense that they were focused on certain aspects of the self and certain tacit aspects of the self and how they are represented in autobiographical narratives, plus a standard autobiographical interview. So it's a combined methodology interpreted with George's descriptive method. So it supposedly this method gives you more than just a thematic analysis because it's focused on looking for this invariance, the structural invariance of experience. Whether it really uses Epoche or not, it's also debatable methodologically. But it's one of those methods that is, I would say, within the spectrum, more on the side of those accepted in the community, the classical descriptive phenomenological psychology of Amadeo Giorgi, supplemented with these control measures of severity. And here is the interpretation, which is Anna's PhD crowning paper of that, where you can see how certain experiences are divided on this line of well, it's not a timeline, is the tripartite distinction of the aspects of lived present, lived past, and lived future, and how the issues of self and other are related to that. I'm not going to go into describing it, but we can talk about it later. The key here is that the past is a burden that overwhelms the present and affects the effective, rapidly changing states of the present, which self-perpetuates and makes the future moving away. And in terms of the self, we called it projected self-unpredictability. And in terms of others, the anticipation of the hostility of the other. But there is a gap, as you can see, between the past, present, and the future. And here is a very nice graph that shows this. What it shows is, I'm not sure if you can read the top headline, but the temporal structure is intact. As the temporal structure moves between T1, T2, T3, and T4, what changes are the effective contents of the present dimension, which are represented by these changing colors and changing shapes. But the past negativity stays in place, and the dissociated future that is empty in terms of self-other hostility and this anticipation of it stays also in place. So Anna did this graph, and she wanted to emphasize with the changing shade how even if the structure stays intact, so it's an invariant structure, so to speak, the self in its own self-awareness, to refer also to Peter's idea, gets more and more blurred or diminished. Now, this was done in the classical way by a human extended mind. Paper, pencil, scissors, cutting across the cases. This is Anna's floor. Putting the teams together, organizing them. There is a certain procedure to do it. Now, if you use an automatic language model to do the same, it will do it superbly well. I checked it, and I will show you. It's unbelievable what, especially the 4.0 GPT, that shows, well, it's not really transparent, but it shows its own reasoning and how it arrives at conclusions. It's superb. It takes 5 minutes. 5 minutes, yeah. To analyze what took Anna well, fourth year of the PhD now. The interpretation is finished. Now, what are the issues? There are the standard issues, of course, which have to do with the reference value, especially when there are different outcomes. These are pretty close. So what is the benchmark for the accuracy of that interpretation? Is it our interpretation, or maybe it can surpass our interpretation? Okay, so the metric benchmark and the reference value, which should be the golden standard, is the standard issue. And the lack of transparency, because what's happening in all the layers of the transformer is, of course, not prone to explication, is another standard issue. But phenomenological issues are a little bit different. They are broader in a way, or more narrow, depending how you define it. One is that if it's an eidetic variation which has to do with experience, with human experience that is involved in it, there's clearly no experience involved in an eidetic variation performed by an LLM. So there is no imagination. It's not that the imagination is hidden in the model. There are vectors in the model, there are numbers, but there is no imagination. You have the outcome without the imagination. The outcome might fit the outcome of a human mind, but there is no imagination. And the meanings that are being analyzed are not lived. Okay? These meanings are not lived because this is a consciousless model. So the question is, of course, phenomenologically, is this alleged way of arriving at conclusions? So the standard criticism that I also mentioned in the morning against the AI is broader than this lack of imagination and a lack of lived meaning. But there is also a path that I would like to propose, which is a little bit offside of the typical computational phenomenology, which I would call computations in phenomenology. Okay, how you can use these computations for the sake of certain goals that are defined as well, having to do with this lived experience, lived qualities that are the point of departure. So first of all, it doesn't have to imply that the mind is computational. It may, but it doesn't have to. There is no need to determine the nature of cognition to implement this in a way that I will show in a second. It's somehow assumed to an extent, but it doesn't have to be explicitly stated. So there is a methodological naturalization, some would argue, but it doesn't have to be ontological or epistemological. That is absolutely sufficient. But the advantage is, especially with large data, you can transgress the limitations of sampling and limitations of the human extended mind methods of pencil and paper and scissors. And if the results are feasible, then I would say, let's do it. Okay, let me move on, because how much time do I have?
Let's do maybe 5 minutes. Is that okay? Do you have, is it okay, 5? It's maybe a bit more than 5.
It's definitely not okay, but
it's never 7.
Perfect.
Final offer.
I'll take the offer. You still have to respond.
Yeah.
So, without going too much into definitions, I will try to move more to the examples. So, 2 paths. As front-loaded phenomenological variables, so which are not reliable in terms of constructs, other constructs, but in terms of correspondence to the a priori defined phenomenological theory. And second, as proxy variables for qualitative data analysis. So one example is, the example illustrating the first issue is state, which is a structured phenomenological interview. If you know is and EU, it is similar, but a bit broader in terms of how questions are phrased and the scales that are being used. It is all about temporality. It's not about just the flow, faster, slower. It's about 7 dimensions, and it's based on 42 items, each targeting a particular phenomenon. And here you have the results of a different sample of 52 patients interviewed with this structured interview. What you see here that the 3 most frequent phenomena has to do with anomalous experience of the past. not with the present. Okay. What are these phenomena? Here are the prompts that are given, but there's also a discussion around the prompts. One has to do with the negativity of the past, the other with the strong tendency to analyze your life history. And the third one to the experience of sudden memories with intensity, such intensity that it seems as if the past was happening now. If you look into this table from the earlier metasynthesis, you will see that this is just the two aspects of the explicit temporality that were found with this tool that correspond, of course, post factum to the negativity bias and the reverberating past. Now, you can go a little bit further with that and notice very interesting. So there are three scales. Has to do with the frequency of the atypical experiences, their perceived disturbance, and their intensity. And for borderline patients, the intensity is always higher than the perceived impairment and frequency, okay? So it's always more intense than it is considered, I don't want to say dysfunctional, but impairing, okay? Then it is considered impaired. And if you now look into the questions that have, or the phenomena, the questions representing phenomena that have the highest size effect in terms of difference between the control group, which we had, and the borderline group. These are these two of which are negative view of the past again, and reviving the past in terms of flashbacks. These buck plots, they represent this mean intensity for these on the left side, for the BPD group, and for the intensity. So it's just one of these three dimensions, also for the BPD group. So we can see that the intensity of these three phenomena is the problem that is, well, should be targeting. You can also look at it in terms of all the layers of having to do with each of the dimensions, but I will just skip that because I have probably 2 minutes. The point is that the measurement here of the statistical significance here presented in terms of the largest size effects. So it goes like the past phenomena, now it's a group of past phenomena, has the largest size effect, then the present, then the future. It really nicely corresponds to what we know from the phenomenological theory, but it moves the emphasis a little bit from this notion of instantaneity, or give it certain depth and certain validity, certain scientific clinical validity to what has been theoretically proven. Now, the second example has to do with proxy variables. This is a bit more complicated in terms of math, but here, this is the work of Marta, her master thesis, where the Roberta transformer was used for analysis of sentiment. Crucially, it was also trained on annotations on sentiment, on borderline narratives, on autobiographical narratives, and then was used, this automated model, to analyze both clinical data and publish autobiographies. These sentiment values were combined with word length and word frequency values based on previous empirical studies that had nothing to do with borderline regarding time perception. So there was an input, an interpretative input into these variables based on these previous meta-analysis, how certain combinations of word length and frequencies and certain sentiment values, so there were two scales, one on valence, one on arousal, correspond to time perception. Time perception category is just slower, faster, so it's not phenomenological in this sense, but the narrative itself is a qualitative series of meanings, okay? And when Marta measured both the autobiographies and the clinical data, she found a lower sample entropy in the BPD group and a lower autocorrelation when measured sentence by sentence. Now, this is something that can be interpreted phenomenologically, which we did, where in a way that this lower entropy of the group indicates less variety and more regular repetitive patterns of time perception when you see the whole of the narrative. But the lower autocorrelation, measured sentence by sentence, can be interpreted as a decreased association between each state in which it was applied. Now, it should be done, by the way, in terms of meaning units, not sentences, but well, so far this is what we get. So there is a short variability, short-term high variability, but the overall narrative has a lower entropy, okay? Now, interestingly, you can represent it, one second. So this, an indirect interpretation of it, it has to do with the continuous discontinuity, what we call in the conceptual paper, continuous discontinuity. But of course, the question here, the crucial question for someone phenomenologically cautious is the validity and the correspondence to lived experience of these proxy, because it's really a series of proxies. And now we are in the stage of validating this. This is one of the autobiographies where you have the ups and downs represented in terms of, these were redefined in terms of effect sizes. So there is the overestimation and underestimation, and certain experiences in these biographies that correspond to what has been found. And I'm almost done. And this is an example of one of Anna's patients, where the same model was used to illustrate the interview. So it's not longer an autobiography written retrospectively, but a live interview, where sentence by sentence, this peaks, ups and downs were graphically represented. And we looked just for the top and bottom, just the key extremes to see the corresponding experiences, okay? Some of them match very well, some don't. So certainly it needs a calibration, but I think it's a very promising approach to see. By the way, I call it a phenomenological phenogram. Phonograms are used in ethnography, but it's a phenomenological phenogram because, especially if it was following the meaning units y by one, not just sentence with the lag of one, that could be said to represent the unfolding of the lived experience in terms of what, well, the constructs represent what they represent. But if you go back to the qualities themselves, you can calibrate or recalibrate the phenomenological phonogram to give an objectified, like EEG of the mind. So conclusions. Phenomenological quantification is possible, debatable by some, but to have a safe position, I would say it's a hybrid approach, okay? It's a methodological pluralism when you take all these different methods, but you target the phenomenon. So in the end, it's the phenomenon that is of interest. And when it comes to borderline, what we found so far with these, so there were 3 samples really, because this was the autobiographies, there was the clinical sample of Anna and the other different clinical sample of Anastazia, that severity matters, but not linear time. The structure stays intact regardless of the age and stage of treatment. There's the atomistic temporal passage. The intensity is higher than frequency in interference. The past domination, as shown by these different magnifying glasses of the tests. These were all different magnifying glasses, but they all showed this past domination in various aspects, okay? With the negativity over reflection and being revived, taking hold of the unfolding of experience. And the outcome is what has been already named being stuck in the narrative discontinuity. But we would add that this is now justified to say that this being stuck is being stuck in something that's an intense atomized past and not just in the instantaneity of present experience. Thank you for your time.